Welcome back to KC Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice and digital resource, helping nonprofits survive and thrive. I'm Ruth Bombigas, and here at the library, we are joined by David Renz, who is director of the Midwest Center for Nonprofit Leadership at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. That's a whole lot to say, David.
It is a lot.
But we're glad you're back, and you have big news to share.
Well,
you're still the director.
Director of the Midwest Center. I'm professor emeritus now because I have technically retired. I'm semi-retired.
I was going to say, it sounds like you still have a really big job.
That's what we plan on. I'm going to keep working at the Midwest Center, and I still teach a class every now and then. Well,
but you don't
semester.
have a regular load of
not the same as
duties.
it was before.
Oh, well, then you can kind of relax and chill and just run this huge kind of think tank resource.
If you say so. Yeah.
We have not had you on the show for a while, and I know there's been data that's come out. The whole look at the sector, and as I was reading through the summary, the nonprofit sector has grown again here in Kansas City. Give us a little update.
Well, it continues to grow, although at a slightly slower rate than it has maybe over the last 6 or 7 years. It's increased about 3% in size overall. Frankly, the larger organizations have increased in larger, meaning more than $50,000 a year in budget. So it's still, many of them are very tiny, but that number has only increased by about 1%. So the sector is sort of in some ways stable. Its revenues are about the same as they have been, except that there's been some significant activity in the foundation community that has actually increased the size of the assets of the sector overall. Now, that money gets granted out by foundations, and of course, the operating nonprofits, which is what most of these are, they are looking forward to applying for and getting the support of those grants.
Why? So you're seeing growth in that foundational area?
In the assets, not
in
the
the
number,
assets.
but
What's that reflective of? A good market?
It's. I'm sorry to say, it's a reflective.
Of more
It's
people
reflective
dying?
of a combination of a good market and people passing on
away.
who've been significant community leaders, and they've generated substantial wealth that they have now left to and have dedicated to building the community. And that money largely goes to nonprofits so they can invest in their programming. Some of them are building buildings or other things, but a good share of that money is going to grow programs and continue to serve the community. Yeah, well, absolutely.
In the foundation world, let me back up. When we talk nonprofits, there's 9,000 nonprofits the way your survey counts those.
Charities, and then there's a couple thousand more religious congregations, temples, mosques, churches, etc.
So it's really a huge sector of Kansas City's economy, and
It is. It's about 11.5% of the economy of Greater Kansas City. With the growth and financial health of the for-profit sector, it's slightly less in percentage, but its actual revenues and assets are very solid. The number of nonprofits we have really reflects a vibrant civil society and community. I see some signs, I regret to say, that worry me a little bit about where we're going in the community, and I guess I'm going to be starting to encourage people to start giving thought to this bouncing market that we have and what's happening to the economy, because nonprofits, like everybody else, are exposed when we hit a recession. And the people that are experts in this tell me, well, it's probably a year off or so, but you're going to start hearing me say to nonprofits, okay, if it's a year off, are you starting to think about this? Because one of the things that folks tend to overlook until they actually need the support is that nonprofits are here to serve, and the demands increase when you're going through tough economic times. Right. At the same time that your investments and other things may be declining, and frankly, giving cannot keep up with the demands that are there. We saw that during the Great Recession 10 years ago, but I guess I'm going to be Debbie Downer here in the next year or two, because I'm going to be saying, hey, folks, let's start looking ahead. Let's start planning.
So with that in mind, for some people, a year seems like a long time, but really in the life of the cycle of most nonprofits, it's not that far out. You have to plan your programming, or at least keep in mind
Absolutely
where that's going. So what kinds of things should nonprofits be looking at or doing with that in mind?
Well, a critical issue, and this is always a point of tension in the nonprofit world, is to have adequate reserves to sort of absorb little shocks here and there. Excuse me. The foundation community is an increasingly important, still small, but increasingly important source of revenues for nonprofits. And so that's significant. Building relationships with donors and helping people understand what is the difference that you make in the community, so that people have an appreciation and understanding and ideally a commitment to supporting you as you're continuing to do the work, or maybe even expanding the work that you're doing, depending. Many nonprofits are not about the safety net, care, emergency intervention, those kinds of things, but obviously a significant segment of the nonprofit community is, and those demands are going to be an issue. Of course, everybody's affected by the market when it gets to be toughest. And unfortunately, we're seeing a smaller share of nonprofit revenues coming from individual donors. And it's a little early to say, but it seems like the tax changes of the early year of the Trump administration are having some impact on individual and household giving. Foundation giving continues to be stronger because that's what they're in, but foundation giving is only about 15 to 16% of revenues from philanthropy coming into the nonprofit sector. Now, the other part of it, but of course that's being affected by politics, political agendas, et cetera, is that a good share of nonprofit revenue comes from governmental sources. Nonprofit, take healthcare clinics, for example. The money is coming substantially from Medicare, Medicaid, third-party insurance systems, things like that. And those numbers are bouncing around. I mean, you've heard in just the case of Missouri lately that more than 100,000 kids have been pushed off the Medicaid rolls in the last couple of years, even though the eligibility requirements haven't changed at all.
Wow.
So what happens when that happens, of course, is that we end up looking to private philanthropy and other private sources of revenue to help support that. And of course, government budgets, while they're not literally down, comparatively are down, particularly around safety net services, things like that. There are lots of other nonprofits that provide valuable support and care for our community who are not the emergency interveners, and libraries and private, of course, hospitals, universities,
arts, culture,
exactly,
all of those kinds of
museums
organizations.
And frankly, the arts community in Kansas City has been doing that. Nonprofit segment of the Kansas City community has been doing even a little bit better, interestingly. They've come back stronger since the recession than some of the other organizations.
That's interesting. Why do you think that is? Have they been more aggressive?
I think things were so tough during the recession for so many organizations that they started ramping up their efforts to better connect with donors and citizens and artists, and just help people appreciate why they make a difference that's valued in a community. Emergency assistance, shelters, all those things are really critical, but man does not live by bread alone, and we need these other areas of support as well.
I wanted to go back to the survey for a minute and have you share kind of in that 9,000, well, really 11,000 plus, how are we broken down in Kansas City in terms of like health, education? What are the top sectors?
It's like distribution of wealth in America. It is chunked in a way that's, depending on your view, I guess, strange or not. I'm kind of used to it now, but about 8 or 9% of all these organizations are healthcare organizations, and yet about 75% of all the revenue going into nonprofit causes are going to health organizations.
Oh, that's interesting.
So now again, that's philanthropy plus governmental funding for Medicare, Medicaid, And of course, with an aging population, a lot of those organizations are getting Medicare money, and that's part of what keeps them alive. Arts organizations are really only about 7% of
the total pie
pool of the population in terms of revenues. They're about, I think they're about 11% of what it is.
You can cheat on your cheat sheet.
I have to cheat because these are numbers I don't always remember exactly. So arts and culture is about 7% of the number of organizations, only 2% of the actual revenue that's coming into these organizations. Now, there are for-profit arts organizations that are also out there, of course, and it's a sector that blends quite comfortably.
Now, I know often we talk about the numbers and the surveys, and I know that you've got a salary one about to come out. What's the McNugget on that?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think people don't always understand is that there are a lot of career paths in the nonprofit sector that you can make a good living wage at. The money is not great necessarily. We released a salary survey a half a year ago that reports average compensation. And of course it varies dramatically from the smallest nonprofits don't always pay all that well. Frankly, in the numbers that you were just citing a few minutes ago, where 2/3 of nonprofits are smaller than $50,000 a year in budget. Well, those organizations, of course, are primarily working or entirely working on volunteer labor. And so that's different. But among those that are employers, salaries here are pretty much comparable to what they are across the country if you adjust for inflation and cost of living in a region, things like that. That said, of course, it varies again by mission category. If you're working for a large private art museum, you're certainly compensated better than you are if you're working for a very small advocacy organization. We are about to release, we're currently conducting a study, the follow-up. We report on salaries one year, and then the next year we report on nonprofit benefits, the benefits that are paid to employees. And we see even more of that extreme there, unfortunately.
Less benefits?
Fewer benefits. They're actually decreasing. The percentage of nonprofits in the sector that are offering health and other kinds of benefits to their employees is decreasing. Now, part of what's making that up is many of them, though not the majority, are providing some kind of a stipend that will allow employees to go into the marketplace
and just buy
the kinds of plans that were enabled by the Affordable Care Act and things like that. But part of what we look forward to learning in this current survey, it will be released in November when we hold our next annual nonprofit management conference. It will be interesting to see what is happening, how I don't expect it to have improved, but what is the percentage of decline and what are the implications of that?
That would be a question for me, is if you've got kind of steady salary, yet you've got growth of nonprofits not keeping up in the benefit pool, what does that do to the labor pool that may be coming into nonprofits?
Yeah, well, and that's a critical issue. Nonprofits have always, to a large degree, the majority of them have relied on dedicated, committed people who are there because of the mission. One of the things that's an interesting twist, though, is that we're seeing a growing share of, particularly millennials, but younger folks coming into the sector, but sometimes they're not quite coming into the sector. They want to work on something that achieves social impact, but they also want better compensation, or at least a level of compensation that gives them a good quality of life. And so we're seeing people increasingly being what we would call socially entrepreneurial by starting for-profits for social impact. And they're really blending nonprofit and for-profit, sometimes pulling some governmental connections in there too.
We talk a lot about survey. You all are really a resource in the community. Just in the couple minutes we have left, what are the kinds of things that somebody can go to Midwest Center for Nonprofit Leadership, MCLL, NL.org.
Yes.
That can help them.
Well, whenever we do a conference or programs, we post the resource materials for those conferences on the website, so you can go to our website and go back and see. We'll do sessions regularly on financial management, financial leadership. We have a lot of resources on the website advising people who are on governing boards, boards of directors. How do you organize? How do you recruit? How do you try to maintain or enhance the health of your board? Things like that. We certainly have that salary survey. The report on the salary survey is posted on the website, and the benefits one will be once we release that in November as well. The state of the sector, these overall numbers about statistics, we have the 2-page sector at a glance, but then we have a 12, 13-page
robust,
more in-depth document. And for the real gluttons for punishment, we did a very in-depth sector study about 3.5 years ago, actually funded by the Kauffman Foundation. And so there's a 5-chapter book of sorts in a PDF form on the website. And so for those who really want an inside scoop, that's a place to go for that too.
David, you're great as always. Midwest Center for Nonprofit Leadership. We're going to have you back sooner because you're not teaching. You're going to have more time, right?
Well, more time, I guess so. Also have to go visit the grandkids.
In Hawaii, it's rough.
It is a tough life.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much.